So young Timothy is pastoring the church at Ephesus, he's trying very hard to fill in the shoes of the great apostle Paul, which were huge shoes to fill. And sometimes they call the person who follows a successful minister the sacrificial victim because things don't go that well compared to the previous guy. And here's poor Timothy. He's following the apostle Paul, and he's doing the best that he can. He's sickly, he's ill, he's timid, so he's shy, and he's got people in the church trying to take control, and he's got to step up to the plate and all of that. And in the midst of all of that, there's really a lot of people that really, truly need some care. And he's got to discern between all of that. Where do I really put my time and focus it, and what do I kind of just have to set aside? So he's got to prioritize and all that. And the Apostle Paul realizes that when you're in ministry, every bit of ministry is dealing with needy people. Everybody has a need. Physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, you name it. Everybody's got a need. Everyone has a need. And so the task becomes just huge. And so the Apostle Paul is going to write to him because he knows what Jesus has said, the poor are with you always. The needy are with you always. And so he's going to give them some instruction on how to care for needy people. And as we begin this section on caring for the needy people, he starts by, first of all, Timothy, you got to care for your congregation. You got to care for the congregation. And one of the key words that I haven't really noted as we've been going through 1 Timothy is the concept of household. The household. We are the family of God. And we didn't sing that song just before this by accident, you know. I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. We are the family of God. And so his first instruction to young Timothy is you're a young pastor and you've got some elderly people. It appears that from the context of the book, I'm kind of reading between the lines, there was some difficulty that's going on between the elders and the younger. And a young guy now leading the church, perhaps wanting to go in a new direction, and the older people saying, that's not the way we've always done things around here. And so he says, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. He's saying to the young pastor, when you're dealing with the older people, because you're a younger man, now younger as you're going to find is below 60. Timothy's case, he was really around 40. Okay, he's just a young guy around 40. And so he's saying, when you're dealing with those who are older, do not rebuke. You see, at that age of 40, you think you've got enough experience in life where you don't need anyone telling you how it should be. And yet, you haven't had the experience of the person over 60 in their 70s and 80s telling you, I've lived life long enough, and I've been in my 40s, and I know exactly what you're doing and where it's headed. You see? And so he says, now, don't rebuke an older person harshly. Don't think you're a know-it-all. But when you go to that person, you're to entreat him and exhort him as if he were your father. Isn't it interesting that he chooses family terminology here? Because we're part of the family of God. Now then he says, now the younger men, when you're dealing with them, you've got to treat them as if you're brothers. Not because you have office and you're up above them, but you're just one of them. I'm a brother. So you're not condescending and talking down. You're really getting in there with them and pulling them along. He says that's the way you do ministry when you're caring for a congregation. He says, now with the older women, you treat them as your mother. And when it comes to younger women, you treat them as your sister with absolute purity. It is a shame how many ministers fall in the ministry due to lack of setting up some boundaries when it comes to dealing with the younger women. So that there's often a compromise morally on their part because they have not set up those boundaries. And it's very, very important for her to set up boundaries. And that boundary being set up here is with all purity. Whatever it takes. You know, I don't counsel a single woman all by myself. I would never think of it. I'd have my wife involved. I'd have somebody else involved. There's no way I'm getting involved. I'm not going to. I set up boundaries so that I don't even have the appearance of evil. Okay? And so that's what he's saying. If you're going to care for the congregation, you got to make sure you're doing it in all purity, because Satan will use what your good intention was with a bad slander about it to destroy the congregation of God. You don't want that. And so you've got to take it and do it with all purity, with some boundaries set up and put in place. Caring for the congregations is first. The point here is we're all family. Every one of us is family. And that's why he uses the expression here as a father, as a mother, a sister, and a brother. We are all part of the family, and we're to do it in all purity. The second part he goes for is caring for the needy. He says, give proper recognition to the widows who are really in need. I find it's interesting that the first problem that arose in the church, Acts chapter 6, among the congregation, was that some of the widows were being overlooked. The Grecian or the Hellenistic widows were being overlooked, and the Hebrew widows seemed to be getting first in line when the daily distribution to the widows was being made, and they had a complaint. From the very beginning, ministering to the needy became a problem. And that's what we do. We minister to the needy. The church is all about ministering to the needy. Primarily spiritual needs, and we try to address physical needs, social needs. A whole thing that we do with fellowship is all about social needs, meeting your social needs. We try to do that, but the very first one we have is with widows. Now, widows don't tend to be as much a needy area in our culture today as it was then, because we have social services. We have a system called Social Security. We pay into this system, and then later you draw out of this system. And those, prior to the Social Security network system in our country, it was family. Family took care of family. I find it very interesting. With the rise of the Social Security system, we see the downfall of the family. Because now we no longer depend upon family, we depend upon government as our family. We no longer depend upon our children and grandchildren to take care of us. In fact, our children and grandchildren is scarcely to see them come visit us at the nursing home. Because government is your new family that takes care of you. And a paid nurse. They even have, I think it's called visiting angels. You pay people to come and be your friend. You see how our culture has gone? With the simple thing of the government taking on the role and the responsibility of the family. When we delegated to that, we got the disintegration of the family. It started with the beginning of Social Security, and it just slowly has taken its place of the family. But what he's saying here is, the church has an obligation, in spite of the government, the church has an obligation to take care of those who are in need within our congregation. Now, it's impossible for us to take on the need of the whole world. It's impossible for us to take on the whole need of all of Muskegon, but it is possible for us to take on the need of those within our congregation. And so the Apostle Paul here is instructing Timothy. He's saying, now, the widows who are in need. Now, every church, as I said, has need. Our church has need. Every church has needs. And maybe the needs today aren't so much as they were then with a widow having a need, but we still have people with needs. He said, first thing you got to do is recognize the degree of the need. There are degrees. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. There's the ones who are really in need and those who just have a need. There are those people who have no need. There's people who have need but think they don't have any need. And then there's the person who says they have a need and they really don't have a need. And so what he's saying here is you have got to recognize the need for what the need is, and that there's degrees of need. And some needs supersede other needs, and they have got to be addressed first. And so as we move on in the passage, he says you got to note the character of the needy as well. He says the widow who is really in need, in verse 5, I've jumped down a few verses, we'll come back, pick up the others. The widow who is really in need and left alone, she puts her hope in God. So you want to help those who are hopeful in God and trust in God. If they have hope in God and they have need, that's the person you really want to help, because we are a church. We are a family. We help our own. We help in family. The bottom line of this whole passage is family has responsibility to help family. And we have a responsibility as a congregation to help those in our congregation first, because we are family. And then if we have the resources, we help those who are without. He says, but she's got to be hopeful if you're going to help her. No, notice what else. She continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. This is a committed Christian. She's a committed believer who's got her hope in God. She's praying night and day. And that expression reminds me of what we spoke of last year in the Christmas season about Simeon and Anna when they took Jesus after he was born up to Jerusalem to have him circumcised. And while they were there, that Simeon made this blessing, you can let me die now, Lord. I've seen the salvation of God, because he saw Jesus. And Anna, who after she had been married 7 years, her husband died, and she'd been a widow, and she's in her 80s, and she served in the temple, and day and night, that's all she did was pray and serve God in the temple. She came up and pronounced a blessing upon Jesus too. She was there at that moment. We have this is a woman who's devoted herself to God and is a true, genuine Christian, and not just an occasional attender. He goes on and he says, but the widow who lives for the pleasures is dead even while she lives. This woman is not like that. She's spiritual, the one that the church is going to help. But the woman who's just living selfishly for herself,